All right, welcome everybody to the Tuesday, November 7th, 2017 meeting of Kubernetes SIG Service Catalog. We're continuing our retrospective on getting to the initial beta release from yesterday. So go ahead, Aaron, it's yours.
All right, thanks guys. Thanks, Paul. Thanks everyone for coming. Yesterday, just to refresh, we had a initial kind of retrospective on what we did well, what we think could have gone better. We completed discussion on what we did well. Of course, we're going to keep trying to do those things. But we didn't complete discussion on what we don't think went well and what we think could have gone better. So I'm going to paste the link to the summary of that discussion yesterday, the summary of that voting yesterday. We had 4 things that we're going to focus on. We had 1 first place and 3 tied for second place items. The first place item on what we think could have gone better reads, controller code is very long and duplicated and hard to reason about over time. You can read the 3 that tied for second. So what I'd like to do, have a 5 to 7 minute conversation about each of these items. We'll do it speaker queue style. For those who don't know, speaker queue is just if you've got something you'd like to add to the conversation, type +hand into the chat, and I will add you to the high-text speaker queue here. So I'd like to get started with the controller code is very long and duplicated and hard to reason about over time. Looks like we've got our first hand with Paul. So Paul, why don't you take it away?
So this is the one that I was laughing about at the end of the meeting yesterday. I agree that it's long and duplicated. However, I think it's completely fallacious to think that if we had continually refactored, that we would have been able to deliver when we did, and that the code would have been higher quality. My own personal subjective opinion is that premature refactoring is on the same level as premature optimization, and frequently gets you into more trouble than it gets you out of. So while I do agree that the code that we have is I would not say it's overly complex. It's just unfactored. I think that we are actually in a good spot in terms of being able to refactor to something that actually captures all of the requirements. So I think it would have been very hard if we had gotten, say, 50% of the way functionally and then refactored. We might find that we're fighting our factoring after that. So I agree, but I also disagree. That's it from me.
Okay. So we've got no other hands. Our goal here today is to decide whether we should change something for the O.2 development cycle, and if we should, what should it be? So does anybody have other comments on whether or not they think we should change something and or what that should be over the next few months or so? Speak now, otherwise we're not going to change the controller code. All right, Paul.
I mean, I don't think that's really true, right? I think that was a joke. So I know there are a number of people in the group that are interested in refactoring, and I think that's a good thing to do. What I think that before everybody gets excited about refactoring, let's make sure that we have tests that are going to be durable, that ensure that things still work afterwards. So like we have a number of unit tests right now that test pretty complicated edge scenarios, and I think it would be fantastic to move those to integration tests before we start doing any refactoring. And likewise, I think there are a number of dot comments in the code that have gotten stale. It's probably worth somebody taking some time, someone or multiple people taking some time to do those kind of like nitty-gritty nuts and bolts things and get us into a good state so that we can refactor with confidence.
All right. So my apologies. I forgot to ask for a note taker. Can anyone please volunteer to take notes?
I can try to do that. Give me a sec.
Thank you, Doug. Much appreciated. Everyone send Airmail Doug a beer.
Yes, please do.
So Doug, while you're doing that, I am going to move on. Vile, you are next on the speaker queue, so go ahead.
Yeah, so, well, Paul sort of kind of alluded to this, which is testing. And I think if we are looking at things that might change, is really focusing on making the code more testable, so we can really focus our tests that are much smaller, much more focused, and can actually start testing some of these corner cases that are very tricky to do right now. There's a lot of things that you can't really test today, with the exception of the huge reconcile loop. So it's like everything is in the reconcile loop, and there's a lot of setup that goes ahead of it, and then you test one little thing, and then you validate the entire world again. So regardless of how we achieve that, I would like our tests to get more robust.
All right. Any other comments? It sounds like so far we've said part of the refactoring that should go forward is, of course, add better testing, maybe do some refactoring to make code easier to test, and improve the in-code comments. Have I missed anything, Doug or Vile? Sorry, Paul or Vile, that you guys have said?
I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. Any other comments here? We've got about 2 minutes left in this item. If I don't hear anyone else with comments, we'll just move on to the next one.
Vile, I apologize. I didn't really capture what you heard. I didn't really hear what you said, so maybe you can write it down in the notes for me, because I was trying to write down what I remember Paul was saying. So you can just add it to the notes for me. I appreciate it.
All right. Final comments here. Going once. All right. Let's move on to the next item. This is one of the three that was tied for second place. Some code got in very fast, some not so fast, and it was unclear what the criteria was. So if whoever wrote that is on the call, can you please speak up? And if not, we'll move on and just begin discussion on this.
So it seemed like there was a period of time there. This is Vile. I think this was mine. It seemed to me like there was a bunch of things that were not necessarily on the, were not captured as like P0s for, say, the beta, but they were deemed to be high priority items, and then they kind of sometimes might have taken a precedence over something. It was also unclear sometimes, holding back some PRs due to rebasings, and something sat for a while. This was just my sort of kind of observation, and it was just non-clear on like what order some of these changes had to go in, and why some of them didn't go in.
Do you have an example you can point to, Vile? With everybody understanding that there's no blame in this.
No. It is not. I am certain that I crammed some crap in there that was not a P0, but I got to think about it.
So on that topic, I have risen Niall's hand to bring an example to the forefront here. Also, I apologize for not calling out what Paul just called out. This is not about blame. This is about improvement. So sorry, guys. Go ahead, Niall.
Yeah, so I think that like such big features as QPR is a good example. So like when I worked on making a CRD support based on TPR. Like I saw some, like I think that the code needed improvement before getting merged, and there were also some issues mentioned in the other GitHub issues about TPR support, I think, and in general. Actually, like even in DPR, I saw I started digging on the history of TPR to understand better why some things were implemented this way, and I saw that actually someone has commented that this PR has been prematurely merged. So yeah, I think this is one of the examples. And now ultimately we completely deleted TPR support. So yeah.
So now, are you referring to the original set of polls for TPR or one that you made for CRD?
TPR one, the original one.
So I think so for example, and we're kind of like having a retro over a very large amount of time, but I think that like the TPR work, for example, was done before we went through the exercise of scoping what O.1 was going to be. And I think that we got much better as we approached beta in terms of very clearly stating what the priorities for different things were. I don't think that we were perfect, and I do think that due to just overall limits on bandwidth in the group, that we do have some things like, for example, the work that was done for the settings API group is actually still pending to the repo. So I definitely think that we're still not perfect, but the exercise of getting people to agree on what the scope for O.1 was went a long way to mitigating the kind of like chaos that was characteristic of the run up to KubeCon EU earlier this year. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that actually like it helped us to speed up the development, but I guess we won't have such a luxury once like the beta is out. Like for example, we have renamed resources, like binding was renamed to service instance credential, then to service binding, then like I don't know how many times we renamed the binding resource and some other stuff. Pod preset is also probably another example of this thing. So like I think it was fine for like striving to release beta as soon as possible and trying different things, but once we start releasing stuff, like once we stabilize our API, I think we need to pay more attention, and it will not be as easy to just rename things, for example.
So we've got under 2 minutes left. So let's try to focus this on what we might be able to do going forward, specifically around getting code in, but making it clear what the criteria are. Does anyone have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think that if we continue to define like the group's priorities together for the next like major release, like O.2, that was very effective at bringing focus to the work that the group was doing. And I also think that since the pool of contributors has grown and hopefully will continue to grow, that we'll have more review bandwidth to be able to get overall merge bandwidth up. I think time will tell if we continue to work in the way that we have after we scoped O.1. If we continue working like that, I think that will probably be very effective, but the only way to find out for sure is to do it and ensure also that people maintain focus on the project. Like if we have folks that get pulled onto other things and we don't have a lot of people paying full-time attention to the project, it will slow down and it will be less manageable to keep everybody on track. UF.
All right. We've got a hand from Niall. Go ahead, Niall.
Yeah, so I think that for some features, writing proposals and discussing them first would be also beneficial, like just from my experience for parameter supports in instance and bindings, for example. We wasted a lot of time on like discussing which one is the right approach, and then finally I just wrote a documentation page like describing in the detail what I'm proposing, and like I think we sorted it out in like just several days. So I think this is a good way of not wasting time on the one hand and agreeing on the things on the other.
All right. So we're at over 7 minutes now. I have heard a few things here. I've heard to keep doing our planning process that we did just prior to the actual 0.1 release. I just heard that having more sort of one-on-one-ish discussions helps not waste time. And I also heard that as we add more full-time contributors and we add thus more pull request reviewers, this problem may go away, specifically related to getting clear criteria and getting PRs merged according to those criteria. Anything I've missed from anyone who talked during this item? Going once? All right. Let's move on to the third and second to last item. This is another that was tied for second place with 3 votes. More interop testing before beta with existing brokers. So who brought this one to the forefront yesterday?
I think that might have been me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. While I love the idea of pressure to getting us to beta as quickly as possible, I like that aspect of it. As we got closer to date, I was very, very nervous that we were sort of living inside of a bubble and only testing against stuff that was specifically written for service catalog, as opposed to, for example, testing against existing brokers. And I know that technically I'm as much to blame for that as anybody else, because I was trying to get stuff tested out with the IBM cloud, because we have existing brokers for Cloud Foundry, but it just wasn't able to happen in time. So I apologize for that. But overall, I wish there was just a better way for us to verify going into beta that we're not going to have to break the API in the not too distant future as we start running into testing against real live Cloud Foundry brokers. And that's the whole point of it. I was just worried that we didn't do enough testing against existing stuff.
All right. So Paul, you raised your hand first. Go ahead, Paul.
No, you go ahead.
All right, now go ahead.
Okay. So my concern is that, like, I agree that we should probably test against existing brokers, but every time we raise this question whether existing brokers will be broken by our changes or not, like, I'm unaware of the pool of existing brokers. So it's about speculation and trying to ask some people what do they think, and I think it's not very effective. If we had an actual list of brokers against which we can test, for example, or like we can even write some integration tests or something like that, or at least have a list of brokers which we should make sure that they are not broken or something, and I think it would be beneficial. If possible. I don't know, like some brokers might be like not public, I don't know.
All right. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we could have done as a group on this one. I'm curious to know what that would be.
All right. Does anybody have a suggestion on what we can do going forward to test against existing brokers? Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, so obviously, as I said, from my side, I let the ball drop because I didn't push harder to get the stuff tested with inside Bluemix with our existing brokers. That's one thing. I'm going to try to keep pushing on that. But I think as a group, to Paul's specific question, I think maybe what we should do is reach out to the Cloud Foundry folks, because they do have a community of service brokers that they regularly ping to ask questions of. I would like us to perhaps reach out through our contacts at Pivotal to find out which service brokers out there would be willing to participate in some sort of beta testing program.
Alrighty. Jonathan, go ahead.
Hey, so I don't know about like established actual brokers, but I do know from my time working as a Cloud Foundry developer, they do have a like fake broker for testing purposes. That's a Ruby app that adheres to the spec that they use for basically the same thing testing Cloud Foundry. So we might want to look at using that maybe.
All right. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that the Cloud Foundry broker, the test broker that you referred to, I've done a little bit of looking into it, and I think it would be a good project for somebody to do to figure out exactly what the test suite they use to test that broker is. In general, we've also talked about potentially having a conformance suite for brokers and platforms, or some kind of list of performance or conformance tests. And I think it would probably be profitable to look at that. My hesitation about plugging in specific brokers and in a vacuum, considering things that existing brokers do to be correct, is twofold. So the first one is that there are a number of gaps in Open Service Broker API spec that we've been working to close. We've closed a number of them, and the further we get, the more seem to pop up. So I am not sure that in a vacuum we can necessarily say that a particular X or Y broker's behavior is necessarily correct. The second one is that I think that once you start testing with a real broker, I'm not sure who's going to pony up the resources and money required to test with brokers that actually have like a monetary chargeback that has to be done. I'm not sure that we are going to be able to do such a thing in the context of the SIG. However, we tested with a number of brokers at Red Hat that we developed, and that was really productive in finding bugs in Service Catalog. So my own personal feeling is that it's probably most actionable for individual vendors to test with the brokers that matter to them. And then there's always the question that has to be asked when some behavior isn't what's expected, is it correct? And is the platform's behavior correct and the broker is wrong? Is there a gap in the spec? So I definitely applaud anyone's efforts to test with real brokers. We just have to be careful and thoughtful about whether a particular perceived break is actually like gap in the spec, bug in Service Catalog, bug in the broker, bad tests, whatever. EOF for me.
All right. I am actually going to put my hand down because we have 7 seconds left. So what I will say is, what I've heard is, yes, it is important to test with real brokers. We may want to plug in some tests and invest in the test infrastructure to test against reference brokers. But it may be a pitfall for us for a few different reasons to actually install and run conformance tests against real brokers. That may be best left to the individual vendors to do. Have I missed anything that anyone has said here? Going once. All right. let's move on to the last item. I had incorrectly written this last item in the agenda. I fixed it just now. It's a final tied for second item with 3 votes again. It reads focus on code quality and testability. We purposefully left this one separate from controller code is very long and so on. So whoever wrote this, can you give an overview here, please? Anybody? All right, well, let's just start a discussion here then. Anybody have any thoughts on code quality and testability?
I feel like we've already covered this one in some detail. My own opinion.
Yep. Anybody have additional things they want to say beyond what has already been said in the controller code is very long item? Going once? All right. So with that, thank you, Doug, for writing all these notes down. I will go through these. I will write up a summary of everything and send it out to the Google groups. We can take it from there, decide what we want to do going forward and what we don't. I think it's been fairly clear from discussion on each of the 3 items that we talked about in depth, what we're going to do here. So with that, if anybody has other items they'd like to talk about, please speak up here. Put a hand up. Go ahead, Niall.
Yeah, I haven't seen the improvement of the docs as an item on the list to discuss, so I'm a little bit surprised that it's not there. I mean, we do have the docs, but I think sometimes we don't update them when we change some implementation stuff, and also we probably just lack some of the docs as well.
So Niall, I will paste in the voting spreadsheet here so you can see everything. And Paul, you got a hand up, so go ahead.
Yeah, I think Niall makes a good point. I was actually hoping to be able to get some technical writers that work at Red Hat to help improve the documentation quality in the repository. I haven't been successful at that so far, but I think that the solution here is probably that we need to have some folks that actively contribute to documentation that work in the SIG, just like we have folks that are primarily focused on documentation in Kubernetes. So that's my own 2 cents. I think it would be great if somebody could own making the docs better. I think that's one of the gaps that we had in 0.1 is that the docs are still kind of apart, or at least could use some updating. And I think it would be really good if somebody was able to pony up the resources to have people to make the docs very comprehensive in 0.2.
Alrighty, so it sounds like the key thing there is, can we get additional resources from somewhere, from one of our organizations, to focus specifically on writing docs, just like we do in Kubernetes. Any other comments in this area? Going once? All right, any other items anyone wants to bring up? Going once? Go ahead, Doug.
So just for clarity, when's the next call? Monday?
There is a call scheduled on the calendar for next Monday. I think it remains to be seen if there will be anything on the agenda for then.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure we're not planning on having a call tomorrow or Thursday.
I am not planning on one.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so since we don't have anything else, I think we can call it a day. Again, look for that summary that I'll send out. And thank you, Doug, for taking notes. That is much appreciated. All right, take care all.